Welcome back to Project Ozone 2, Kappa Mode, episode 18. Well, at this point in the series, mid to late game, it almost feels like we're regressing a little bit. We've just set up a Tinker Smeltery in the last millennia. However, I've got it automated with Applied Energistics too, and I thought it was kind of neat, so I figured I'd show it off. Nothing groundbreaking, but a couple really nice little mods, I guess, to showcase. So taking a step back here and looking at this controller, we can see the zinc and the copper is getting cooked up real quick because we're using a new type of fuel. No longer blazing pyrotheum. I'm using diesel. I have a diesel cow. I was streaming a few weeks back, and a commenter, Mr. Daddy Death, who's given me a lot of tips on this series, told me, like, man, you're using the worst fuel. Use diesel or something. So that's what I'm doing, and huge improvement. All right, so looking at the AE2 system here, we can see we got about 2100 brass blocks, and if we've got less than 2200, it's going to emit a redstone signal, which is what we're seeing. That's fed into a sequencer here from RF Tools. The delay's set to 5 ticks, so 5, 10, 15, 20 ticks is a second, so 2 seconds, 4 seconds, we get an enable. And then rinse and repeat. Every 4 seconds, it's going to send a pulse. And the mode is set to loop 3. We click over here, we'll get a better view. But the current mode I have, loop 3, it will loop continuously when the redstone signal is on. And when it's low, it'll pause, which is pretty sweet, right? It's a clock, basically. And the reason I need it to be a clock is because of the impulse hopper. I have it set that every time there's a high pulse, from the clock going, high-low all the time, it's going to transfer 3 zinc and 9 copper if it can, and if there's room. You can see how that was just red because there was not room. Does a transfer, and the items kind of tick away. It does use power, and I actually kind of forgot about that until now, but it's been running for a while, so it must not use power very quickly. One thing that's really slick about these impulse hoppers, or just Ender IO machines in general, is the ability to not have to use pipes. The machine can pull and push if you configure the face properly. So that's a really slick way for me to, grab certain quantities from this ME interface. As we can see here, we've configured the interface to supply these amounts, and my system keeps zinc in a block form, if that makes sense, like a zinc block. So what this thing does is if it needs ingots, it will actually downcraft it. The interface will use this crafting card, and if there's a recipe, it can downcraft the zinc blocks that I have into ingots to supply them. This is kind of a trick I've been using more and more. It was not something I was aware of until I was playing Nami Factory, and I was watching a lot of other YouTubers and streamers. I didn't realize how powerful it was to kind of supply items like this. I had always used a pattern card and just, pushed the right amounts into the machine. But in this case, I didn't want, this smeltery to get full of a bunch of copper and have no room for zinc to go in, and then the machine would essentially lock up, especially when I'm asking for so much brass to get made. And the whole reason, of course, I built this was because that exactly happened. This was full of copper, no zinc could come in, but no brass was getting made. So it's kind of a nice little way to throttle the system. We have this connector here, filtered only brass blocks. So of course, after they're casted, they're going to get pulled out and pushed into the interface. Another pretty nice thing is here, I have Tesseracts automated. So we can see here, they're actually pretty cheap. We've got the right machines and infrastructure set up that I can autocraft that. So that's kind of my power management system. What else? What else has changed here? Well, we got walls. I got kind of tired of staring out into the black abyss. I also had thought about doing some terraforming, but creepers are kind of taking over that for me. The contrast is pretty hard on the eyes. You can see I don't have a good eye for color palettes, but I like the brightness. It makes the upstairs, feel nice and bright. Not to mention this carrot here with night vision also does some heavy lifting. Just flying around the base here. There's really nothing too interesting. I'll talk about a few things, but that's kind of the base. It's not very big. Upstairs is my farms, and that's kind of it. I guess this south area here, my Tinker's Smeltery, is the south wing. And if we come over here to the west wing, actually, let's go to journey map here. So this was the Tinker's brass setup on the south. We have some thermal expansions here on the east, and nothing really on the north. This is actually the farms up top. So there's no north wing yet. And then the east wing here is Mekanism. I think what I'm going to do, maybe, is just kind of, go this thickness. Not go much further. And then just start building kind of vertical. And cramming these machines in the upwards direction. Nothing too interesting here, but I guess keeping with the theme of Applied Energistics Autocrafting, we are making these compressed, redstone, diamond, obsidian used in Mekanism. We've got the crafting patterns here, whatever you call them, actually paralleled, so they're pushing up and down on both sides. And again, going to this interface here for these infusers. We've got them all on, I guess. These ones are elite, these ones are advanced, obsidian, and diamond. What have we done here? I'm going to point this out just because it's not something I've done before, and maybe it's obvious to other people. I had just always automated Mekanism in a really weird way. I always had problems with Mekanism. There's certain sides, the way to interface with the machine. I don't really like it. I know in newer versions like 1.18 or 1.19, I think they've improved it, but in these older versions it's kind of awkward. So we have the interface here pushing the craft in, and instead of actually sending the amount of redstone I need to make this circuit, looking at this recipe here, yeah, so instead of sending like a redstone with the osmium to make the circuit, I'm actually just sending the osmium to make the circuit. I'm using I don't know what you call this chamber. The title here is config, but I almost kind of want to call it like the catalyst. I'm keeping redstone here, and if we run low on redstone, let's actually grab a few because I know I have a lot extra. See, we ran out now, so this guy kicked on. Oh, that happened so quickly. Oh, it's only sending a few at a time, I see. And it's also going to this bank. But yeah, so just because this crafting card is here, it is telling this interface and this interface, hey, you need to make some compressed redstone. What I don't like about Mekanism is, as far as I know, I have to use pipes, ender IO pipes, to push in the catalyst, the redstone, because if the top is input, pushing in the osmium to make the basic circuit, then that means you can't also put in the extra, which is the redstone catalyst. It's got to come in on the side. And also, the output has to leave out the back. You can't have stuff coming in and going out on the same face. So you're kind of stuck with this requirement to have all these conduits. And it's not so bad. You can see here we've got everything else automated in kind of the same way. We're using Tesseracts everywhere. I actually have so many of these now that I'm losing track of where they are, which is never really a good thing because, where's that power going? I don't know. What else? We have P2P tunnels. They're kind of everywhere. We follow this back. We can see this is kind of as we get a little closer so it all renders in. We got cables kind of going everywhere. The cables kind of close to the roof here on the ground level. These are all part of my main net, And then up top here was the original network I had built in the last millennia. The green network is my farming net. So I'm still doing a pretty decent job of keeping it organized. I'm sure it's confusing to look at, but just like everything, it makes sense to me, the guy who built it. There's nothing much here. These transposers basically are what make the Tesseract autocraft. This one's redstone, that one's inderium. We got an induction smelter that, I guess, just for those recipes. This thing here is making that concentrated seed bucket for the controller. It's kind of a weird thing. Pretty easy to make, but this concentrated cloud seed, because we're still making, many ME controllers with my network design. I need lots of controllers. So we had to automate this. Again, the ME interface, using the config menu here to send the ingredients. Got the crafting card. So we make, the cloud seed, and then this side here is the concentrated cloud seed, pushing up to a tank. I love the Ender IO tanks. The ability to fill buckets, and then again, pull, push, no piping required, into the drawer. It's one of the few areas I actually have drawers set up. I've really tried to get away from using drawers, but just because of how nice this is to throw a storage bus on the back here for this little system, that's what I've done. Most other places in the base here, I've tried to use the level emitters. But before we go over to that little subnet, let's talk about my Applied Energistics network again briefly, hopefully briefly. So this controller here, you can see, some of these P2P tunnels are full, 32 of 32, 20, 6. You can see each side. So we still got lots of room, right? This whole controller is probably excessive, but I like the idea of being prepared. So these machines here and these molecular assemblers are part of the main net. You can see because the Fluix here is purple, or it's the basic Fluix color, those cables. These are just, sag mills, a couple of recipes. We've paralleled them. So the 4 sag mills on the bottom here all have the same recipe. We're also using the interface to pass over dark steel, which gives a bit of a bonus for some items. And again, the perk of having Ender IO machines is they can actually pull. So the interface is actually pushing in the craft, but the machine is actually pulling the dark steel balls from the interface. So really cool functionality. What do we got here? We got alloy, making different alloys. I've kind of left the lower level to have, 4 times, and then the upper level is something different. And then here we're kind of using thermal expansion machines, sort of the same way. They don't need catalysts. They just, they're maxed out here. And then again, furnace. If we look at something like glass, for instance, that I really should have, set properly. I should have a buffer set is what I'm trying to think. And what's making them? So that furnace is making it, that furnace is making it, and that one. I guess it didn't need the 4th. But you can see all the recipes that are programmed in. And if we come back here, that's pretty quick. I asked for 1,000. It's been, 20 seconds? It's half done. What else here on my main net? We have these plates from Galactic Core. I really do not like these machines. I guess more so the Galactic Craft mod in its entirety. It doesn't really interface nicely with anything. It's very fussy. I thought Mekanism was bad, but this is much worse. It basically only accepts items in from the top, which is fine. The craft gets sent out the bottom, which is fine. But notice the conduit. It only wants to come in on the side. So it's very restrictive. You can't configure the device. I also don't like that this pattern here, sometimes, I don't know why, gets pushed in unevenly, and then it just does not complete. It jams. This is just the compressor, but we have the electric compressor. Yeah, it puts them out of order every once in a while, not all the time. I don't get it. So I always walk by here and check that there's no, lingering items locked up. These advanced inscribers here, they're pretty slick. I like them. I really need to give them acceleration upgrades. But basically, I've automated this a little differently than I normally would, and I quite like it. If we look at the emitters here, we can see we have the printed silicone, we have basic, set the gold, look at the processor. If we search the processor here, you can see it's a little different. I used to have this set up as a buffer, like it would keep, 5,000 of them. I turned it off for some reason, so I got to rebuild that equipment because these things actually take quite a while to make. But for now, if we look at the processors, we can see with my level emitters, I'm able to keep at least 3,000 of them this way, which helps. So instead of actually using the interface with the patterns to push the ingredients in to these advanced inscribers, we just queue up the items. What's going on there? Notice my system always has gold ingots as they are, so I don't need a crafting card to queue them up. But here, we actually have to make the block, so we have a crafting card. And then this is the interesting part. To make a Certus processor, we queue up these 3 ingredients, and it's all the same configuration, but we extract round robin when there's a redstone. When this guy turns on to make more of these, it will pull items out of here, and it'll disperse them to this inscriber and this inscriber. And I think, oh yeah, and then it also pulls them back out and pushes them into the interface to complete the craft. So yeah, this is my main net. So when I go to my terminal here, and I'm asking for things, if we scroll down to the bottom, where are we here? All these things that say craft, these are all on my main net, and I can autocraft them. Between using these machines or using this crafting tower. So that's pretty cool. But that is not as interesting as the green subnet, the green and cyan subnet. So this subnet, maybe without getting into too much detail, is part of the green subnet up here, which is my props, right? And going back to, previous episodes, the link between the main net and the green subnet, the farm subnet, is right here. Storage bus, looking at an interface, as far as it's concerned, it's a chest. So that's cool. And we've got this controller here with various P2P tunnels. And we send channels way over here. And what I end up doing is pulling 6 channels. Pulling a single channel to this P2P tunnel. Why does that say 6? Oh yeah, 1. Okay, yeah. 2, 3 P2P tunnels. And then the other 3 are 1, 2, 3. This is kind of funny. I love how I always say, trying not to get into too much detail, and then I go off on a tangent, but I just wanted to point this out. P2P tunnel and its counterpart, wherever it is. In this configuration here, I throw a controller on, and what that allows me to do is stick, with this cable, I could have 8 P2P tunnels going into it, and then a bunch coming out. Like, see how we have 1, 2, 3, 4 coming out. So that's 8. Potentially, if I was to change this cable type to a dense, I could pack in 32 on this face, and then I could have 32 coming out on this face. So that's 32 times 32 tunnels leaving that direction. And then I could do that on each side. That's with using this extra controller. When we go up here and we look at this little smaller subnet, notice the P2P tunnel 1, 2, 3 doesn't go into a controller. So when we look at this cable here, we're using 4 of 8. because there's a P2P tunnel there, which is 1 and 2 for this side, which is, 1 and 2 there. Guess what I'm trying to say is I could only actually have 4 P2P tunnels in this configuration because you've got 4 coming on the inlet and then 4 on the outlet, unless you were to stick in another controller, which gets pretty crazy, right, at that point, because it's all stemming from the big one down below. So coming back to this side, we've got 3, and then 3 gets sent out. So we're not quite at the bottleneck, but we're using 6 of 8. Long story short, right? We come to this other P2P tunnel, and a dense cable comes out, and we're using 2 channels. So again, another subnet. So we got our main net to a subnet, to its own mini subnet. And what happens here is pretty neat, I think, anyway. I didn't know I could do this until I literally built this thing. But I got a bunch more controllers. I got 32 channels, I got 32, I got 14, 24, 32, 32, 24, tons of channels. And what that allows me to do is this little setup, which I've talked about before, but we keep an amount of wool stocked based on this configuration here. So that's cool. That's the whole point of this system. It's to turn this essence into useful items. It needs its own crafting storages and place to store items, and it's kind of compartmentalized. It's its own thing. It doesn't really talk to anything else, but of course my main net can see it all. I'm looking at it. But what's nice, if I come to the screen, all I have to look at is the items, my essences and the useful items it makes. I also started doing the infusion stone essence crafting in here too. I made a bunch of spare stones just so the stuff could happen in parallel. If we are lucky, something will show up on the screen maybe. There we go. Stuff's happening. That's fine. But what I've done here now is I've said, where's a good example? Nope. Aha, my dark steel. This is actually where I make dark steel. So I tell this system to keep a stock of dark steel, and it does, and then the rest of my base uses it as needed. I also have this part of the base making planks. If I go to my main net here, and I look up a chest, and I say, you know what, I actually want 2,000 of these, it's going to be able to do that no problem, because there was like 50-some thousand oak planks sitting in there. But now what's going to happen automatically is this system's going to say, hey, start turning that tree essence into oak logs, and then start turning those oak logs into planks. And we got the sawmill here, where we're pushing in logs at pretty quick speeds. And stuff's happening. So these machines, the sole purpose of them is just for this subnet. The rest of my base, like these machines here, are almost just for me. Like when I want to come over here and initiate, manual autocrafts and set up, new recipes in here. This stuff, I'm only actually really looking at this stuff. This is kind of all supposed to be automatic, happening on its own. It's kind of the idea. Now coming over to this side, the red subnet. The reason I'm kind of mentioning all this is I know a previous episode I wasn't really convinced on my strategy if I was, setting things up the way I liked. After a lot of trial and error and tweaking, I'm pretty sure I do like this setup. I don't know, if I'd recommend it. It seems kind of overkill, but it's kind of a fun little experiment, I guess, for myself. But the red net here is my ore processing network. We can see it's got a bunch of ores in it. It's got some pulverized dusts, and then it's got about 80,000 ingots that are nicely processed. So I thought this was kind of cool. I have one of those laser miners from Mine Factory Reloaded, but it's really slow. I need to make more more miners. Most of these metals here are coming from my essence farm up top. If you remember, we got about 32,000 essences, which is what my farm keeps stocked, and then it shuts off. And then we keep approximately 8,000 ore. It's roughly 8,000 plus 1,000, and then, you know, plus a few extra mistakes. Yeah, looking at the wireless terminal is going to add all my stuff. So if we look at the green net here, we've got approximately 8,000 of these ores, which is fine. That's exactly what we want. That's what the level emitters are set at, right? Maybe not these ones, but right there, yellow red ore, 8,000. Had to double check, convince myself. And then now back at the red net, when we look here, we'll see approximately 1,000, you know, plus or minus a bit extra of the ore. So what I've done here, I thought was kind of cool. Tapping into my green network again, I have a subnet. This subnet's a little different, but it's actually facing backwards. If that makes sense. Usually the perspective is from the larger network, you've got a storage drive or a storage bus looking at the smaller network. But in this instance, it's backwards. This little green network here has got the storage bus and it's looking at the green network. I guess ultimately this should be like a different shade of green because it's kind of its like own mini satellite network. But regardless, for this situation here, I needed a controller because I'm using 16 channels. I could not get away with no controller because that's an ad hoc network, and ad hoc networks can only have 8 channels. So what we do here is we say, hey, dump aluminum ore, you know, dump iron ore if you've got a redstone signal. No crafting cards needed because the green network's already keeping a threshold of iron ore for me. You know, that 8,000. So just export them when requested. Now this is the part that I thought was kind of neat. I've never really seen it done before. But the red network has the level emitter. So it's asking for 1,000 iron ore. And if it runs low, the green network will supply it through the export bus. The interface here is actually part of the red network. So it's kind of like a handshake of items. The 8,000 ores from over there in the green network are getting pushed into the red network as needed. Coming over here, we've got a bunch of interfaces, again, supplying these items. We pipe them, and then looking at, some of those ones aren't actually configured. I'll just pick one of these in the middle, lead. We ask the pulverizer to make about 4,000 lead, and everything's got a filter on it. They're all sped up. So when we need lead, the pulverizer kicks on. There's already ore waiting there to get processed, and it runs. And the reason I wanted this is because some items need pulverized, you know, metals, and I just figured it'd be kind of handy just to have them on hand. If we look at, I guess coil is something I could make. Let's make 1,000 coil. Got iron, copper. What's going to happen here is this guy kicks on. It's making copper. I had to actually space out my machines. I had the pulverizers next to each other, but I didn't realize that they actually act as a solid block, and the redstone propagates through this block to the one next to it, which would make it run inadvertently. So I had to space them all, and I threw lamps in the middle. It was part of the reason, you know, during all my testing, that my ore numbers are sometimes kind of overshot. And then here it's kind of the same difference. We have, you know, copper ingots getting cooked up. What else here? For the nether ore, or rather these induction smelters, I'm actually processing nether ore. It's a little different. I've decided, looking up a few of these here, if we, maybe diamonds are a bad example. Oh no. If we induct them with sand, we get a chance at rich slag, and the whole reason I'm doing that is to try to get a bit of a passive amount of rich slag to make this stuff, which It's needed for, you know, several things. Oh, I should make these. So the storage bus is just going to feed in anything that's filtered, and they'll go to these smelters, these induction smelters, and they're all sped up. They've already got sand loaded because, again, the interface here is queuing up these catalysts. No crafting cards needed because it's available. It's already made. A cinnabar. This guy here on the end is a little different. A few items up here, mercury, desh, and zinc. I don't think I mentioned it, but in the beginning I'm trying to make brass, and copper is renewable. It's made from essence. Zinc is not. You have to mine it or, you know, sieve it. So any zinc I get's really valuable. So if I send it to this last induction smelter here, and we combine it with cinnabar, it actually times 4s all the stuff. I used to just make one machine and, you know, push everything through it, but ever since, you know, playing Nami Factory, it's like I need lots of machines. And yeah, if I didn't mention it already, so all these machines are part of the red net. That's where I try to use these Flux cables dyed to the appropriate color to kind of remind me, hey, that's part of this subnet. I never recorded any footage of it. I don't think I've even talked about it yet, but logistics pipes. I've essentially fully moved over to Applied Energistics. I hit B here, you can still see I've got the remote orderer, and there's a couple pages of items. Mainly it's the storage drawers in the overworld with all the sieving items, plus a little bit of pneumatic craft autocrafting. So occasionally I need, you know, something that's coming out of the sieving system, like cocoa beans. If I ask for them, it ends up getting routed to the chest that goes into AE2. So that's kind of my way of withdrawing items from logistics pipes. At some point, I'm going to disable the system. So all those chests that I had set up in the overworld have all been imported into my main net, my Applied Energistics. That's the purple network, and that's these drives here. You can see we've got lots of room. We've got 64K cells, tons of room. I guess the reason for making this video today was to kind of cement a milestone, so to speak. Like, I've done a lot of stuff off camera since the last video. A lot of work on fully migrating over to Applied Energistics. I'm really happy with what I've got built. It makes sense to me. It's maybe a little, you know, cumbersome and awkward, but I think it's kind of cool. I really like how I can come to this terminal and, you know, just see these items. But the one thing I wanted to point out that I just set up, and it's pretty basic, but it's super useful. When I'm using my terminal, you can see it sees purple, green, and red. It sees everything, right? It's my whole system, minus anything on logistics pipes. But if I'm troubleshooting something, like, I don't know, I'm trying to figure out, maybe I misconfigured my network. I've got items going, you know, in a circular logic, and or something's going wrong, which, you know, has happened a lot actually. That's why I built this. But we can see we've got essences here and we got ores here. If I don't want to see those essences, I can click that button and boom, they're gone. And then same with these ores. If I don't want to see those ores, and I'm just trying to troubleshoot my basic main net storage, which is just kind of, you know, general items. There's really no bulk storage. I've carefully constructed my network, so a lot of the bulk items are on their own network and they're split. So this makes troubleshooting things really easy. If I'm trying to figure out, you know, items are going into the main net and they should be going somewhere else to like a subnet, I can quickly, you know, turn off those buttons and troubleshoot what's essentially just those drives. I maybe have, you know, a storage drawer somewhere with a couple items, like here. There's a storage drawer with a few items in it. That's me testing something. That's me actually testing sending items from logistics pipes to AE2. But we don't talk about that because those results are not what I wanted. So yeah, these buttons here are pretty slick, really easy to set up. Basically, you make a button module, you link it to a redstone receiver, you know, give it a bit of a story there. So we come up to, nope, it's not this network. So yeah, the green subnetwork right here, this redstone receiver, one of those buttons is tied to it. So when I push it, it toggles, where is it here? This ME inverted toggle bus. And what happens is it kills power to this part of the network. So the storage bus down here on my main net cannot see the interface because this segment's unpowered. Now it's really important, the placement of the toggle bus. If I was to have it right here, let's get a better view. The main net is supplying power through this quartz fiber. If I was to put the toggle bus here, it would kill power and this network would power down. And a few things would happen. It takes a while. It's a waste of time waiting for this thing to power down, power up. Also, it would kill all my level emitters, which would make all those harvesters from my factory loaded run indefinitely and jam up. So it's really important that I have the controllers powered at all times. I'm just killing the power to the data. Okay, same idea. We got the redstone receiver here, and when we toggle it, it's killing, or it's turning off rather, it's toggling this bus, which is killing this storage bus here, so the data is broken. Let's look at it from this side. Yeah. Data is turned off, but we still have power. And again, that's really important, right? Because if I was to toggle this and it was to kill, you know, this power connection, that means all this would power down. You know, all the redstone would power down there. Let's check how fast this is. We can see essence. We turn it off. Essence is gone. We turn it back on. Essence is back. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. It was a long one. I hope it wasn't too confusing. I just thought it was kind of neat